as expected, we did know that the next best thing that people will do is to spread this xenophobic notion. So that's the news going around the world now, that we're xenophobic. And of course, typical of our government, they are panicking because they know that their business interests are being shaken.
The official statement is that we condemn that. We do not support that. And they made it even with me in a press conference with the Foreign Minister. He said if there are illegal migrants in South Africa, they have to be handled through the proper channels of the law of the country. But at the same time, we see that these people who are harassing, our African fellow citizens are free to do whatever they want. That's terrible. That's something that, sometimes makes us very sad. And sometimes you see people in uniforms just watching what's happening.
President Ramaphosa sent a delegation to me yesterday. We met with them. And I explained the reason why it was important for us to discuss it.
Jacinta Ngobese-Zuma says South Africa's government is protecting political and business interests across Africa, while ordinary South Africans are left to carry the consequences at home. The African Union says the same government publicly condemns intimidation, but is failing to protect African citizens on the ground. Ghana says the situation has become so serious that it must be discussed by the continent. And President Cyril Ramaphosa responded by dispatching a special envoy, led by Foreign Minister Ronald Lamola, to meet President John Mahama in Accra. So how did a South African movement demanding immigration enforcement become part of a continental diplomatic crisis? And here is the deeper contradiction. Jacinta and the African Union appear to stand on opposite sides of the argument, but both are accusing the same government of failure. The disagreement is over one explosive question. Who has South Africa abandoned? Before going further, one point must be made clear. Jacinta Ngobese-Zuma did not single-handedly create every confrontation, evacuation, or diplomatic intervention connected to South Africa's migration crisis. But the March and March movement, which she founded and leads, became one of the most visible forces behind the 2026 mobilization demanding stronger immigration enforcement. The movement called for sustained demonstrations and promoted the unofficial June 30th deadline for undocumented migrants to leave South Africa. Jacinta repeatedly said the action should be peaceful and directed at government rather than used as an opportunity for violence or looting. But the mobilization also generated fear beyond South Africa's borders. Other African governments began evacuating citizens. The African human rights system demanded urgent action. Ghana sought an AU debate, and South Africa found itself defending its record before the continent. March and March describes itself as a citizen movement, demanding stricter immigration enforcement, stronger borders, and citizen-first access to opportunities. That is the political chain this video examines. Not whether one woman personally caused every incident, but how a movement rooted in local South African frustration became part of a crisis involving presidents, foreign ministers, and the African Union. Let's take a listen.
Our government, like I said, I continue to say, government has people who are politicians and they are disguised as politicians, but they're actually business people. So they're busy protecting their business interests in all these other countries, their mines and whatever. And we have to suffer because of that.
This is the foundation of Jacinta's political argument. She is not merely accusing the government of weak border management, she is alleging that the weakness is deliberate. In her account, politicians protect mines, companies, diplomatic relationships and commercial interests elsewhere in Africa. Ordinary South Africans, meanwhile, face unemployment, crime, failing services and communities they believe government no longer controls. That allegation is extremely powerful because it converts administrative failure into elite betrayal. The message is no longer simply, government cannot manage immigration. It becomes, government refuses to manage immigration because powerful people benefit from the present system. No evidence proving that broad allegation appears in the excerpt. But politically, it helps explain why March and March has attracted support. Many South Africans already feel abandoned by institutions. Jacinta gives that abandonment a target and a theory. Listen to her.
Now, we are tired of politicians who don't know what they're doing in parliament. If they were there knowing exactly what they're doing in parliament, they would be listening to the cries of the people. We are tired of drugs. We shouldn't be having even a Madanga commission today, but we have it because of those same politicians who decided that they were pushing their interests before our interests as South Africans. We didn't vote so we can have places like this. We didn't vote so that we had to pay our taxes to support the whole of Africa. That's not what we're here for. We have children that still need to find a country that's functional.
Did you get the shift? She begins with politicians, crime and public accountability. Then the grievance expands. South Africans, she says, did not vote to support the whole of Africa. This is where the issue moves beyond undocumented immigration. It becomes a conflict between national obligation and continental solidarity. Who should come first when schools, hospitals, jobs and public services are under pressure? Should citizens accept Pan-African responsibility while their own communities remain poor? Or is that framing itself misleading because government failure existed long before migrants became its most visible scapegoat? Jacinta's answer is uncompromising. The country belongs first to its people, and politicians have no right to negotiate away their security. Listen to her once again.
We'll keep on marching until we win. That was the whole idea. Like from the onset, the first march, we did say it's not the last one. We'll continue to march until our government listens to what we have to say. And as expected, we did know that the next best thing that people will do is to spread this xenophobic notion.
This distinction is central to how Jacinta presents the movement. March and March says it is fighting unlawful immigration, not Africans. It says the target is government failure, corrupt enforcement, employers who exploit undocumented workers, and politicians who ignore communities. That distinction matters. A country has the legal right to enforce its immigration laws. Citizens have the democratic right to demand functioning borders, and concern about jobs, crime, public services, or undocumented employment is not automatically xenophobia. But the real test comes in practice. Who decides whether someone is undocumented? A court and an authorized state official? Or a crowd outside a shop? Does the campaign remain focused on individual legal status? Or does suspicion expand toward anyone who sounds, looks, or appears foreign? That is where the African Union enters the story, probably because of the challenge Jacinta has thrown at politicians. Listen to her.
Unfortunately, when push comes to shove, the country is about its people. It's not about their businesses. And we're not going to negotiate our safety in our country anymore with politicians who know that they live in high walls and they've got their children not affected by any of what's happening today and what's happening in our communities. So if they want to keep illegal immigrants, they must take them and put them in their neighborhoods. They must sell their spother shops. They must open them for their children.
This is one reason Jacinta's message resonates. She turns policy into a question of personal exposure. Politicians can praise solidarity, she argues, because they live behind walls and their children are protected from the consequences experienced in poorer communities. That criticism should not simply be dismissed. South Africa's political class is often far removed from the daily insecurity of townships and informal settlements. But another question follows. Does elite detachment justify communities taking immigration enforcement into their own hands? Can genuine anger about government failure excuse intimidation of people who may possess valid documents? And when lawful status becomes impossible to prove to a hostile crowd, where does immigration enforcement end and collective targeting begin? The AU Commission chairperson gave his answer clearly. Take a listen.
The issue of xenophobic attacks on Africans, not only Ghanaians, African citizens from many countries in South Africa is something that is really a big source of concern for the Commission. I was in South Africa a month ago. I met President Ramaphosa and I met Minister Lamola. The official statement is that we condemn that. We do not support that. And they made it even with me in a press conference with the Foreign Minister. He said if there are illegal migrants in South Africa, they have to be handled through the proper channels of the law of the country.
Notice what the AU chairperson did not say. He did not deny that undocumented migration exists. He did not say South Africa must abandon its borders. He did not argue that every African national has an automatic right to remain. He accepted the principle of enforcement. But he drew a line between enforcement by the state and punishment by private groups. That is the point where Jacinta and the AU seem to agree, at least in theory. Both say the law should work. Both say the state is failing. Both say official statements are not enough. Their disagreement is over what happens in the vacuum left by government. Jacinta says communities are unsafe because government is not removing undocumented migrants. The AU says African migrants are unsafe because government is not stopping those who harass them. One state failure. Two groups claiming abandonment. Let's take a listen.
But at the same time, we see that these people who are harassing, our African fellow citizens are free to do whatever they want. That's terrible. That's something that, sometimes makes us very sad. And sometimes you see people in uniforms just watching what's happening.
This is the most damaging accusation against Pretoria. South Africa says it condemns intimidation. The AU says the people carrying it out appear to enjoy impunity. South Africa says law enforcement agencies have been directed to protect citizens, residents and visitors. The AU chairperson says some uniformed personnel have appeared to watch without intervening. If that assessment is accurate, the problem is no longer only migration. It is the state's monopoly over law enforcement. The African Commission on Human and People's Rights has separately called on South Africa to act against xenophobic mobilization and vigilantism, investigate incidents, hold perpetrators accountable and protect everyone within the country regardless of nationality or immigration status. That does not grant undocumented residents permanent legal status. It means even an undocumented person remains protected from assault, dispossession and punishment by private citizens. Get this testimony from the AU Commissioner.
A Mozambican lady was destroying her own, shop, so that she do not, leave it to these people who are coming to, take it over. She was destroying herself, her shop. She has been working there for 20 years. So the human cost of this situation is terrible. But we will take it over, Your Excellency.
That image changes the argument. A woman destroys the business she spent 20 years building because she believes losing it by her own hand is preferable to leaving it for those coming to take it. Her immigration status is not established in the excerpt. The specific circumstances require verification. But the moral question remains. What kind of state allows a person to believe that destroying her own livelihood is her safest remaining option? Jacinta says South Africans have reached breaking point. The AU says African migrants have reached breaking point. Both cannot be answered with speeches alone. Let's hear from Ghana's President, John Mahama.
It doesn't appear that the South African authorities are responding to the magnitude that one would expect them to do. The persons who are funding these xenophobic attacks are known, and they've been left free to continue to do what they want to do.
Mahama's intervention raised the stakes. This was no longer an activist arguing with Pretoria. It was a head of state saying South Africa's response did not match the magnitude of the crisis. Ghana had already sought to place the issue before the African Union. And by July, Mahama was arguing that silence would not preserve African unity. It would weaken it. Hear him.
We had to charter planes to go to South Africa to evacuate our citizens. We operated 3 charter flights as the continental body. AU should take an interest in this issue because it has the potential to wreck everything that we have worked for: African solidarity, African integration, and all that.
This is the continental cost of the crisis. South Africa sees itself as a champion of African integration, free trade, solidarity, and Pan-African cooperation. But charter flights evacuating African citizens tell a different story. Every frightened family that leaves, every business abandoned, every diplomatic protest, every government warning its citizens about South Africa, all of it damages the image of the country that once received the continent's solidarity during apartheid. That contradiction is politically devastating. Pretoria wants African governments to understand South Africa's economic pressures and migration burden. Those governments want Pretoria to explain why their nationals appear unable to rely on state protection. Listen again to President Mahama.
President Ramaphosa sent a delegation to me yesterday. We met with them, and I explained the reason why it was important for us to discuss it. I mean, sometimes these things happen. We want to sweep them under the carpet. But when we do that, we rather do not cure what the problem is. And so I told them, I said, Ghana, we don't harbor any malice against South Africa. But we're raising it as an issue for discussion to even give South Africa the opportunity to take that platform of the continental body and explain what they're doing to the world about the xenophobic attacks.
That is the consequence contained in the title of this video. Ramaphosa sent a special envoy led by Ronald Lamola to Ghana. Mahama told the delegation that Ghana bore no hostility towards South Africa, but could not ignore the attacks, abandoned investments, and citizens returning home. He also insisted that discussing the issue at the AU would give South Africa an opportunity to explain its response and help the continent search for a lasting solution. This was not yet a sanction. It was not a rupture in diplomatic relations, but it was a warning that South Africa's domestic migration crisis had crossed a border Pretoria could not police: the diplomatic border. The government says it condemned confrontation and intimidation, instructed law enforcement agencies to protect citizens, residents and visitors, and ordered action against those breaking the law. Ramaphosa has said legitimate concerns about undocumented migration must never be allowed to become prejudice against fellow Africans. Foreign Minister Ronald Lamola engaged Ghanaian, Nigerian and other African counterparts. DIRCO also warned about manipulated videos, disputed some allegations circulating internationally, and argued that South Africa faces genuine economic, administrative and border management pressures as a major destination for African migration. Pretoria's argument is that it must do two things simultaneously: protect everyone under South African law, and restore public confidence in immigration enforcement. It also argues that African governments should discuss the deeper causes of migration, including governance, instability, economic inequality, and weak regional systems, rather than placing the entire burden on the destination country. That defense cannot simply be ignored. South Africa does face unemployment, pressure on public institutions, corruption in immigration systems, and communities that believe government hears them only after they march. But the existence of legitimate grievances does not settle the central question. Has the state acted decisively enough to prevent those grievances from becoming collective punishment? The AU and Ghana say no. Jacinta also says no, but for the opposite reason. Ramaphosa is now caught between two accusations. On one side, Jacinta Ngobese-Zuma and March say his government is sacrificing citizens to protect foreign interests, African relationships, and a political idea of continental solidarity. On the other side, Ghana and the AU say his government is allowing Africans to be intimidated while offering condemnations that do not match events on the ground. If he strengthens enforcement, he risks appearing to reward anti-migrant mobilization. If he speaks only about xenophobia, he risks convincing frustrated South Africans that government still refuses to hear them. If police stand back, migrants lose faith in the state. If private movements decide who may work, trade or remain, the state loses its authority. This is the precarious situation. Jacinta's campaign is not powerful merely because it can organise marches. It is powerful because it occupies the space created by a government many citizens no longer trust to enforce its own laws. But the continental response is not powerful merely because African leaders condemn xenophobia. It is powerful because South Africa's claim to African leadership becomes difficult to defend when neighbouring governments are evacuating citizens and demanding explanations. And this is why the two sides, despite their hostility toward each other, are delivering the same warning. You can see now that the South African state is losing control of the story. Jacinta tells citizens that politicians care more about Africa than South Africans. The AU tells Africans that Pretoria's promises are not protecting them. Ghana tells the continent that the matter can no longer be swept under the carpet. And Ramaphosa sends a delegation because silence is no longer an option. So did Jacinta Ngobese-Zuma put South Africa under AU pressure? Not by herself. But March and March helped push a long-running crisis into a new phase. Its mobilization amplified citizen anger. Its rhetoric traveled across borders. Fear triggered evacuations. Evacuations intensified diplomatic pressure. Ghana demanded continental scrutiny. The AU chairperson agreed the issue required discussion. And Ramaphosa sent senior representatives to explain South Africa's position. That is a political consequence few grassroots movements ever produce. But influence also brings responsibility. When a movement becomes powerful enough to affect diplomatic relations, it must answer not only for what it intends. It must also confront what happens around its message. And government must do more than blame the movement. It must restore immigration enforcement, protect lawful residents, stop vigilantism, prosecute wrongdoing and prove to citizens that the state, not the street, decides how the law is applied. Anything less leaves South Africa trapped between domestic revolt and continental isolation. This is the South Africa File: History, Power, Politics and Consequences. Jacinta says South Africa's government is protecting Africa while abandoning South Africans. Ghana and the African Union say the same government is abandoning Africans inside South Africa. Who is right? And can Ramaphosa restore control without ignoring citizens on one side or sacrificing lawful residents on the other? Share your view in the comments, but engage the argument rather than attacking nationalities. Threats, insults and collective accusations will be removed.